It started with small things that didn't make sense, details so minor I almost ignored them. But they piled up in my mind like an unshakable weight. I noticed receipts for dinners at places I'd never heard of, airline tickets to cities he swore he wasn't visiting, and hotel charges that didn't fit our budget. At first, I tried convincing myself I was imagining it, that I was just being paranoid. But the unease lingered like a low hum I couldn't tune out. He laughed easily, relaxed, smiling like nothing was amiss, while I juggled bills, appointments, and household chores. I kept wondering why he seemed so carefree when I was constantly exhausted and stressed out. Then there were his phone calls, whispered conversations late at night, the kind you couldn't overhear without straining your ears. And yet I could feel the secrecy radiating from him. He would brush past questions with vague answers, insisting it was work or a friend. But something about the way he said it, the way his eyes avoided mine, made my stomach knot with suspicion. I started noticing the subtle patterns, missing weekends, sudden business trips he didn't mention, and the little luxuries that didn't add up. Designer cologne, fancy cocktails, and the occasional overly indulgent restaurant charge. I tried to rationalize it at first, chalking it up to normal adult indulgence or stress relief. Yet the feeling of being excluded from parts of his life gnawed at me. The contrast was unbearable. Me, managing every aspect of our life, and him, smiling freely, seemingly untouched by responsibilities or worry. I would sit at the kitchen counter, staring at yet another statement, feeling invisible in my own home. It was as if I was on the outside of a bubble he floated in, untouchable, oblivious, and entirely separate from the life I thought we shared. Each day, the small signs became louder, impossible to ignore. I began to anticipate his return from these mysterious outings, watching for clues, replaying interactions in my head, wondering if he'd slip up. My mind raced, torn between denial and the prickling certainty that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The tension built silently between us, a quiet chasm growing with every unexplained absence. I felt the loneliness acutely, like a cold shadow that followed me around the house, whispering that my trust was misplaced. And yet, there was an odd power in noticing, a strange clarity in seeing him unguarded, unaware that I was paying attention. I felt both vulnerability and resolve, a delicate balance that set the stage for what I knew I would eventually confront. Every small inconsistency, every whispered conversation, every fleeting smile that didn't include me, it all fueled a quiet determination. I wasn't sure how or when I would act, but the hidden truth was no longer something I could ignore. It was alive in my mind, pressing against the edges of my thoughts, demanding acknowledgement. The weight of knowing settled deep in my chest, a mix of dread, curiosity, and the faint thrill that comes from uncovering what someone hopes you will never see. As the days passed, my mind kept returning to memories I had long tried to push aside. There were moments, small and seemingly insignificant at the time, that now took on a darker shade. Nights when he claimed to be working late, but returned smelling faintly of perfume. Weekends spent with friends that he could never fully account for, and subtle hints of his indulgence that I had ignored out of love or maybe denial. I remembered the times I stayed home, managing every detail of our lives, while he appeared carefree, slipping in and out with barely a thought for what I carried. The more I thought about it, the more the contrast became unbearable. I had spent hours budgeting, juggling responsibilities, and sacrificing my own wants, while he seemed to float above it all, untouched by the everyday grind. Even simple pleasures for myself felt impossible. Yet he returned from these mysterious excursions with gifts and stories that seemed to have no connection to our shared reality. I felt a gnawing isolation, a sense of being invisible in the very home we built together. I began to replay conversations, noticing subtle lies and evasions I had once dismissed. How often had I asked him about a weekend, only to be met with a vague shrug or a forced smile? How often had I wondered where the money went, only to let it slide, convincing myself that a small indulgence wasn't worth the confrontation. Those moments, once brushed off as trivial, now formed a clear pattern, a secret life he carried out while I remained burdened by our shared world. Flashbacks hit me in waves. The anniversary he forgot, claiming he had a busy week, while I had planned everything down to the smallest detail. The time he laughed off my frustration when bills stacked up, promising he'd handle it, yet leaving me scrambling alone. The holidays where I felt the sting of being taken for granted, my efforts unacknowledged. Each memory added fuel to the suspicion that had quietly taken root. It wasn't just what he did, it was the way he made me feel. Small, secondary, an afterthought. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized how deep the imbalance ran. The contrast between his carefree indulgence and my constant struggle became almost unbearable. I wanted to scream, to shake him into realizing the truth of how I had been overlooked. Yet I also felt the steady pulse of determination building inside me. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about reclaiming clarity, about acknowledging the reality I had long sensed but been too afraid to confront. The suspicion wasn't just growing, it was solidifying into a resolve I couldn't ignore, setting the stage for the inevitable confrontation. It was a Thursday evening when the reality hit me in a way that left my stomach twisting. I had been going through the bank statements one more time, trying to convince myself there was some innocent explanation for the growing trail of unexplained charges. But there it was, glaring at me in black and white. Reservations at 5-star hotels in cities he had never visited, receipts for expensive dinners and champagne that I would never have allowed on our budget, and even pictures of him smiling in places that had no connection to our lives. Each detail was a slap in the face, a cruel confirmation that my suspicions were far worse than I had imagined. My hands shook as I scrolled through the photos on his hidden email account, seeing him laughing in luxurious lounges, holding cocktails I couldn't afford, and posting snapshots that made it clear he had been living a double life. It wasn't just the money, it was the deceit, the ease with which he had woven a life apart from mine, while I remained tethered to responsibilities, sacrifices, and the emotional labor he refused to share. I felt a heat of humiliation rise in my chest, a bitter mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, clutching the printed receipts in my hand, trying to make sense of it all. How could someone you trusted so completely carry on like this, pretending to struggle, pretending we were in the same boat, while secretly indulging in luxury and secrecy? Every memory of neglect and slight came flooding back: the forgotten anniversaries, the dismissive laughter at my complaints, the quiet evenings when I had hoped for his company, but found nothing but absence. I knew I had to act, but the challenge was terrifying. Confronting him without losing control meant holding in the tremor of rage, masking the humiliation I felt so that he could not predict what I would do next. My mind raced through possibilities: demand answers immediately, set a trap, or gather more evidence before revealing I knew. The suspense of planning, of wondering whether he'd notice my awareness, made every second stretch unbearably long. I wanted justice, but I wanted it on my terms: clean, precise, and undeniable. I spent hours replaying scenarios, rehearsing questions, imagining the shift in power when I finally addressed him with the truth. The thought of standing there, composed yet knowing every detail of his lies, filled me with a heady mix of fear and anticipation. I could almost see the moment he would falter, the mask slipping as the reality of exposure hit him. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. By the time night fell, I had made my decision. I would confront him, but not recklessly. I would allow the tension to build, letting him underestimate me as he had so many times before. And in that quiet, bitter moment of revelation, I realized something powerful. The discovery wasn't just proof of his deception, it was the key to reclaiming the respect and control I had been denied for far too long. The path forward was clear, even if it demanded patience, strategy, and the cold precision of someone who had finally seen the full truth. Once the shock of the discovery settled, the anger and humiliation began to crystallize into something sharper, something deliberate. I realized that reacting in the heat of emotion would only hand him control again. So I needed a plan careful, calculated, and undeniable. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange thrill. The shift from powerless to strategic, from emotional victim to someone quietly in command. I spread out the receipts, photos, and notes across the dining table, laying them like pieces of a map I intended to follow to the exact moment of confrontation. Each detail mattered: the timing, the wording, even the smallest gestures. I began imagining scenarios, rehearsing lines in my head, thinking about how he would deflect, how he might lie, and how I could corner him without revealing the depth of my knowledge prematurely. I studied his patterns, his habits, even his subtle tells, like the way his smile faltered when he was nervous or the slight pause before answering questions he didn't want to face. My mind became a theater of possibilities, each scene meticulously constructed to maximize suspense, control, and the eventual reversal of power. I also considered psychological tactics. Silence could be as effective as accusation. A calm demeanor could make him second guess himself. I knew I could leverage his arrogance, the confidence he carried because he assumed ignorance on my part. That arrogance, that false sense of security, would be the lever I needed. I envisioned allowing him to believe everything was normal, letting him relax into comfort, only to then pull the rug out with subtle, undeniable proof of his duplicity. The thought of the moment his composure cracked made my pulse quicken, a heady mix of satisfaction and nerves that fueled the planning. Every day I added layers to the plan. I considered inviting friends or family subtly, or creating situations where he would reveal details himself, unknowingly confirming what I already knew. I practiced maintaining composure, keeping my emotions in check, so that when the moment arrived, he would never see it coming. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how empowered I felt. Finally, I had the advantage. Finally, I had the information that put me in control of a dynamic that had long left me feeling invisible and taken for granted. And yet, beneath the strategy, there was a lingering tension. Would he sense that I knew? Would my careful observations and subtle traps raise his suspicion too early, robbing me of the satisfaction I craved? The uncertainty hung in the air, a delicious kind of suspense that both terrified and exhilarated me. I felt the quiet pulse of anticipation, the slow building weight of the inevitable moment when truth would collide with deception. It was a delicate dance, one I had learned to choreograph with patience, precision, and a hunger for justice that burned brighter than any fear. I waited for the perfect moment, choosing a day when he would return from his latest escape, unaware that I had been watching, calculating, and preparing every detail. I invited him home with a casual tone, masking the storm that had been building inside me for weeks. To the outside eye, everything seemed ordinary, an unremarkable dinner, a quiet evening, but beneath the surface, every element was deliberately arranged to set the stage for what was about to unfold. I positioned myself as if nothing had changed, smiling lightly, greeting him warmly, all the while letting him settle into a full sense of security. The house was subtly adjusted to remind him that I knew without saying a word. A receipt from one of his lavish dinners was casually placed on the counter, just visible enough for him to notice if he looked carefully. A photograph of him in a 5-star suite sat inconspicuously on the sideboard, framed like any other memory, waiting to catch his eye. Even the arrangement of the dining table carried significance, the fine china we couldn't normally afford. The wine I knew he indulged in privately selling cues meant to prick his conscience and test his composure. I invited a few friends over under the guise of a casual get-together, careful to make their presence seem accidental. They were perfectly ordinary, unaware of the deeper drama unfolding, but I imagined their presence amplifying the tension, adding a subtle pressure he wouldn't fully recognize until it was too late. Every glance, every laugh, every mundane conversation was layered with meaning for him alone, a delicate web of observation and anticipation. I could feel the energy shifting in the house, the way the air thickened with unspoken knowledge as he moved through the rooms. I watched him closely, noting the small tells, the brief hesitation when he spotted a receipt, The way his smile flickered when he caught sight of a photograph, the subtle tightening of his shoulders. Each reaction was a confirmation that my preparations were working, that the stage I had constructed was already influencing him without me saying a single word. Suspense built with every passing minute, a taut string pulled tight between us, waiting for the moment I would strike. And beneath it all, I maintained calm, letting him believe the home was ordinary, the evening unremarkable. The contrast between my poised composure and the subtle pressure I had created was electric, almost painful in its intensity. I felt the weight of anticipation, the delicious tension of knowing that soon, every carefully placed element would converge, and the truth could no longer be hidden. The stage was set, the players in position, and the moment I had envisioned for weeks was drawing closer, promising the confrontation I had long imagined. I kept my expression steady, a calm mask that belied the storm swirling beneath. Every gesture was measured, every word carefully chosen to suggest normalcy while I silently cataloged his reactions. He moved through the house with confidence, unaware that I had already seen through the life he had been living, the lies he had woven so effortlessly. In that quiet space, I realized the power of stillness, how a simple glance, a carefully held silence, could make someone question their control. I let him believe he had the upper hand, that the evening was ordinary, that I remained oblivious. Memories of past humiliation surfaced with stark clarity. I remembered the nights I had stayed home, handling bills alone, while he vanished without explanation. The sharp sting of anniversaries forgotten. The way my concerns were often met with impatience or laughter. I recalled arguments where he had dismissed my feelings, where I had walked away feeling small and unheard. Those memories contrasted sharply with this moment, the sense that now I held the quiet, undeniable power. The victim I had once been seemed distant, replaced by someone who understood the subtle art of control, who could turn observation into leverage. I allowed myself brief flashes of satisfaction as I watched him, noting how he relaxed, unaware that every detail of his deceit was in my hands. Each small movement, each casual remark he made, became ammunition, a reminder of the balance that had shifted in this room. The calm I projected wasn't just for him, it was a reassurance to myself that I could navigate this confrontation with precision, that I would not be undone by anger or impulsive emotion. My mind replayed the evidence, the photos, the receipts, the hidden indulgences, and I felt a thrill at how carefully all aligned. I rehearsed the question I would ask, the one that would pierce his carefully constructed bubble of denial. The suspense built inside me, a taut wire of anticipation that made my pulse quicken. Yet I remained outwardly serene. I had learned that power was often silent, subtle, and entirely dependent on perception. I also reminded myself of the contrast framing the weak, overlooked me of the past versus the composed, calculating me of now. It was intoxicating to feel that shift in real time, to sense the control moving into my hands without a word spoken. As the evening wore on, I allowed tension to simmer, letting him wander in ignorance, completely unprepared for the confrontation that was imminent. Every thought, every memory, every silent acknowledgement of my power drew me closer to the moment I had envisioned, the ultimate question that would leave no room for lies or evasion. I waited until the moment felt perfect, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him comfortable, lulled into the illusion of normalcy. Every laugh, every casual remark from him became background noise as I prepared to strike with a single, precise question. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the anticipation of finally turning the tables, of confronting the truth with all the evidence at my fingertips. I could see him in my peripheral vision, relaxed, unaware, smiling as though everything were ordinary, and it made the impact of what I was about to do feel even more intoxicating. Then I spoke, my voice calm, but carrying a weight that made him pause mid-sentence. Why did you pretend we were struggling while living like royalty? The words hung in the air, cutting through the chatter and laughter, sharper than any accusation. I watched as his smile faltered, that confident mask slipping just enough to reveal confusion, maybe even fear. The room seemed to shrink, the quiet heavy with tension, as every guest subtly noticed the shift in energy, even if they didn't yet understand why. His eyes darted, searching mine for a hint of jest, a signal that I might be joking, but my gaze held steady, unwavering, reflecting the weeks of observation, the mounting evidence, and the quiet fury I had bottled up inside. Each detail I had cataloged, the hotel bookings, the photos, the hidden receipts, was invisible to the others, yet alive in that gaze, a silent testimony to his deceit. I could feel the subtle tremor in his composure as the room waited for an answer that he couldn't fabricate without betraying the truth. For the first time in months, the balance had shifted entirely. The playful arrogance, the smug confidence that had once defined him, was gone. In its place was hesitation, uncertainty, the realization that his secret life was no longer hidden. I felt a rush of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from the justice of the moment, the clarity of truth finally confronting lies. The tension was electric, almost unbearable, as I allowed the question to settle fully, letting him feel the weight of exposure without rushing him for an answer. And in that silence, the unspoken realization of his duplicity became undeniable. My careful planning, my patience, and my control culminated in this single moment, leaving him stripped of pretense and me quietly empowered. The room's energy had shifted. The power was no longer his. Every past slight, every hidden indulgence, every moment of being overlooked now aligned to this instant of reckoning. And I could savor the knowledge that the question alone had begun to unravel the carefully constructed illusion he had lived behind. His confident mask faltered almost immediately. Words stumbled from his mouth, excuses that sounded rehearsed, hollow, and entirely inadequate. I could see the cracks forming as he attempted to explain away the evidence I had silently amassed. The hotel bookings, the receipts, the photos, all suddenly undeniable. He sputtered about work, networking, charity dinners, anything that might salvage the story he had built, but each attempt only deepened the sense of exposure. I kept my voice calm, measured, letting him unravel while I remained steady. Every word I spoke carefully chosen to maintain control without aggression. The people in the room began to notice. Friends raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, the subtle energy of judgment shifting the atmosphere. Family members shifted in their seats, sensing the tension and picking up on inconsistencies he could no longer smooth over. Their questions were casual at first, probing, but their curiosity was unmistakable. Each small inquiry, each puzzled glance, added pressure to him, a slow tightening of the coil I had been building. My composure contrasted sharply with his growing fluster. Every falter amplified against the stillness I maintained. I reminded him of minor details casually, the small evidence he had assumed I would overlook. Oh, that dinner in Paris, what was it really for? I asked lightly, as if it were idle curiosity, though the question hung in the air with unmistakable weight. He stammered, avoiding my gaze, grasping at flimsy explanations, but each one fell flat under scrutiny. The room watched, silent witnesses to his collapse, the subtle shift in power so apparent it was almost tangible. I felt the quiet satisfaction of control, the thrill of seeing the truth slowly drag him into the open. Inside, my mind replayed every moment leading up to this confrontation, the months of suspicion, the careful planning, the meticulous attention to detail. Each memory reinforced the stark contrast between him and me. His arrogance and indulgence versus my patience and strategic observation. Every excuse he made only highlighted his deceit and my composure, and the emotional weight of that contrast was almost delicious. I could see him grasping for words, realizing that no flimsy story would mend the gap between his actions and the reality I now exposed. Even as he attempted damage control, I remained in full control of the narrative. I let the tension stretch, allowing each faltering word, each defensive glance, and each pause to underline the truth. The suspense was electric. He could feel it, the guests could feel it, and I could savor the inevitability of his unraveling. In this moment, He was no longer the confident, untouchable man of the past. He was exposed, embarrassed, and completely powerless, while I remained the calm center, orchestrating every beat of his downfall. I decided it was time to extend the confrontation beyond just the two of us, to allow the truth to settle where it could be fully witnessed. Without a word, I began placing subtle hints around the room. Prints of the hotel receipts casually left near the coffee table, a carefully framed photograph from one of his lavish trips positioned just so on the sideboard. I posted a few innocuous-looking photos to our social media. Captions innocuous to anyone else, but loaded with meaning for those who knew the context. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the circle of witnesses widened. Friends began noticing the inconsistencies, their eyes flicking toward him, their whispers barely audible, but enough to make him tense, to make him feel the subtle heat of exposure. He caught sight of the photograph I had placed strategically and laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it. "Oh, I thought you knew it was work-related." But the glance he threw my way betrayed him, betraying panic, the tiniest crack of guilt. The tension in the room shifted palpably. Eyes that had once been neutral began to judge, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Every guest, every friend, every family member became a witness to his duplicity, a subtle but undeniable course reinforcing the reality I had long known. My calm, collected demeanor only amplified his discomfort. The contrast between us stark and unmistakable. I allowed him moments to protest, to attempt explanations, but each word he offered seemed more flimsy than the last. I gently guided conversations, asking seemingly casual questions that exposed further discrepancies: timing, locations, details that he couldn't reconcile without revealing the extent of his lies. I watched the shame slowly creep into his posture, the way his confidence eroded under the gaze of those around him. The room, once neutral, had transformed into a stage for his exposure, and I was firmly in control, orchestrating each revelation with careful precision. The catharsis was palpable, both for me and for everyone else in the room. Friends and family who had previously admired him now saw the man behind the mask, a man whose arrogance and deceit had been meticulously hidden, now laid bare. The whispers of surprise, the subtle nods, the barely contained smirks of recognition, they all fed a sense of karmic justice. Every instance of neglect, every lie, every indulgence he thought I would never notice was now visible, undeniable, and ultimately humiliating for him. It was intoxicating to watch. The way he squirmed under the combined weight of truth and public judgment. I felt a profound sense of empowerment, the kind that comes from being underestimated, from holding the full picture while everyone else glimpses just enough to witness the collapse. My patience, my observation, my planning had created this moment, a reversal where his carefully constructed image crumbled under scrutiny, and I remained composed, vindicated, and quietly triumphant. In that room, the balance had shifted completely, and the lesson was unmistakable. He had miscalculated entirely, underestimating not only my awareness, but my capacity to act with precision and authority. The air finally seemed to settle, though the echoes of the confrontation lingered in every corner of the house. He sat quietly, withdrawn, his earlier arrogance replaced by a hollow self-consciousness that was impossible to miss. I felt a strange mixture of relief and satisfaction, the kind that comes not from cruelty, but from finally reclaiming control, from seeing truth and justice aligned so perfectly. The months of suspicion, planning, and silent observation had led to this moment, and now I could breathe a little easier, knowing the balance had shifted permanently. I reflected on what had brought me here: the endless nights of doubt, the small humiliations that had slowly piled up, the moments I had questioned my own judgment. Each memory, once a source of pain, now became a marker of growth, a reminder of how far I had come. I realized how much strength had quietly accumulated within me, how much clarity I had gained by paying attention, observing, and waiting for the right moment to act. In that quiet reflection, I felt empowered, not because he had faltered, but because I had chosen to assert my own worth and agency, to refuse to remain invisible any longer. The contrast between us was undeniable. He had been confident, untouchable, and carefree, believing he could manipulate and deceive without consequence. Now, he was humbled, stripped of pretenses, and painfully aware of the miscalculation he had made. I, on the other hand, had emerged composed, strategic, and fully aware of my own strength. The emotional satisfaction wasn't fleeting, it was deep and rooted, a karmic echo of every injustice I had endured. The humiliation he felt was mirrored by the empowerment I now carried, a quiet but undeniable testament to my resilience and careful observation. In the days that followed, I found a new rhythm in my life, one that no longer allowed space for deceit or neglect. Boundaries were strengthened, expectations clarified, and self-respect restored. I carried myself differently, lighter in some ways, but sharper in others, fully aware that I had learned lessons no one could take from me. Every interaction became an assertion of the person I had become, observant, patient, and assertive. While the memory of his arrogance and exposure lingered as a reminder of how carefully one must navigate trust and deception. Through it all, I felt a quiet vindication that needed no loud proclamation. The justice I had longed for was no longer abstract or imagined. It was real, enacted through patience, strategy, and unwavering composure. And as I moved forward, I held close the knowledge that my voice, my insight, and my awareness had been enough to transform a situation that once made me feel powerless into one where I stood firmly in control, confident in the clarity and strength I had earned. After the confrontation and public reckoning, life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by clarity, control, and quiet satisfaction. I no longer felt the gnawing anxiety of wondering what he was hiding or when the next betrayal would strike. The boundaries I had once struggled to enforce were now, unquestioned, respected without argument. Financial matters, once a source of stress and manipulation, were firmly in my hands, each decision a reminder that I could no longer be undermined or overlooked. There was peace in that control, a sense of security I hadn't realized I had been missing for years. Even in quiet moments, I felt the lingering strength of what had been achieved. I could see his presence in the house and feel the difference in energy, no longer dominant, no longer untouchable. The subtle acknowledgement of his missteps and my own resilience created an unspoken equilibrium. I didn't need to rub his failures in his face. The knowledge of what had happened, the shift in power, and the respect I now commanded spoke louder than any words could. I moved through my days with the lightness of someone who had reclaimed autonomy, tempered by a steady vigilance that ensured my peace would not be disrupted. I found unexpected joy in the little things, in moments that had previously been overshadowed by stress and worry. Cooking dinner, managing the household, engaging with friends and family all felt different, infused with a sense of agency and self-respect. My confidence had grown quietly but profoundly, rooted not in revenge for its own sake, but in the knowledge that I had acted with precision, patience, and integrity. The long-term peace I had established was not just external, it was deeply internal, a steady undercurrent of satisfaction that no fleeting conflict could unsettle. And yet, there was a subtle tension, a lingering awareness that life remained unpredictable. I carried the quiet understanding that vigilance and wisdom were the truest forms of freedom, that the power to protect myself and assert my boundaries was a skill I would continue to refine. There was no bitterness, only clarity and a sense of justice fulfilled. The world and my home had shifted subtly but irrevocably. I felt free in a way that didn't require dramatics or confrontation anymore. The victory was mine, solid, undeniable, and enduring. In the quiet that followed, I found myself thinking deeply about everything that had transpired. It wasn't just about betrayal or humiliation, it was about trust, awareness, and the way we allow ourselves to be seen and misled. I realized how important it had been to pay attention, to honor my intuition, and to trust the small signs that so often whisper truths before the loud evidence appears. Every inconsistency, every unspoken secret had been a lesson in vigilance, teaching me to balance empathy with discernment and patience with action. I also reflected on my own growth through the ordeal. In the past, I might have reacted impulsively, letting emotion dictate decisions and allowing manipulation to continue unchecked. But this time, I had acted with intention, strategy, and clarity. The power of observation, the discipline to wait for the right moment, and the ability to maintain composure transformed me from someone who was overlooked into someone fully capable of asserting control and reclaiming agency. That awareness was liberating, almost intoxicating, because it proved that resilience and intelligence could reshape dynamics long before confrontation even begins. There was a bittersweet quality to it all, too. While the triumph was satisfying, I could not ignore the sadness of the deception, the realization that the person I had trusted had chosen indulgence and secrecy over honesty. But even that sorrow carried value. It sharpened my judgment, clarified my boundaries, and reinforced my commitment to self-respect. I understood that empowerment didn't mean erasing hurt. It meant integrating the pain, learning from it, and allowing it to guide future choices with wisdom rather than fear. In the end, I felt a quiet, reflective pride. The experience had revealed not just his flaws, but the strength I had cultivated within myself. I had learned to navigate deception with grace, to reclaim authority without cruelty, and to assert my voice in a way that was both powerful and emotionally intelligent. That combination of resilience, awareness, and judgment tempered by compassion for myself was the true victory. And as I looked back, I understood that the most enduring justice is the one that leaves you stronger, wiser, and fully in command of your own life. Even after everything, I knew the story wasn't over, not because I doubted my victory, but because life with someone like him always carries the potential for deception. Yet this time, I felt different. I was alert, aware, and no longer willing to be blindsided. The lessons I had learned were etched into every instinct, every decision, and every glance I gave him. I could sense the slightest attempt at manipulation, the tiniest flicker of dishonesty, and I knew I would catch it before it ever gained traction. There was a subtle thrill in that awareness, a quiet satisfaction in realizing that I now held the ultimate advantage, knowledge tempered by patience. I didn't need to act immediately. Sometimes, simply knowing, observing, and preparing was more powerful than confrontation. The future was mine to navigate with confidence, and I felt a calm certainty that any attempts to deceive or undermine me would be met with swift, deliberate response. Even in ordinary moments, I could feel this subtle tension shift, the balance of control permanently altered. He might try to charm, to persuade, or to obscure the truth, but I had learned to read between the lines, to notice what was unsaid, and to trust my own instincts above any false confidence he projected. The power of awareness, once acquired, was a constant shield, and as I reflected, I realized the greatest satisfaction wasn't revenge, it was freedom. The freedom to move through life with clarity, to trust myself, and to no longer be shaken by secrecy or lies. I felt fully in control, yet there was a lingering suspense, a subtle reminder that vigilance and intelligence would always be necessary. The audience could sense it too, that delicate balance between triumph and anticipation, leaving a taste of FOMO for the chapters yet to unfold, and an undeniable proof that I had grown stronger, wiser, and impossible to deceive again. Looking back, the journey felt almost cinematic, as if I had lived through a story I had once only imagined in private moments of doubt and frustration. It began with subtle inconsistencies, whispers of deceit, and the gnawing intuition that something was wrong. I had felt isolated, invisible, burdened by responsibilities while he indulged in secret luxuries. The betrayal cut deep, a wound that fueled both anger and determination. And it was that very tension that set the stage for the transformation that followed. The discovery of his hidden life was the turning point, a moment of sharp clarity that shifted my perception from uncertainty to undeniable knowledge. The receipts, the photos, the evidence of indulgence, it all painted a picture I could no longer ignore. With careful planning, patience, and quiet observation, I transformed that knowledge into a tool, orchestrating a confrontation that revealed the truth not only to him, but to everyone who mattered. The public or social reversal magnified the impact, turning what could have been private humiliation into a karmic, cathartic lesson, leaving him exposed and powerless, while I remained composed and in control. In the aftermath, I found empowerment in ways I had never anticipated. The quiet victories, the reclaimed authority over finances, respected boundaries, and restored self-worth were far more satisfying than any dramatic outburst. I realized that the strength gained from observation, patience, and strategic action was far more enduring than momentary revenge. I had grown in resilience, clarity, and emotional intelligence, learning to navigate deception with grace while asserting my own worth. And now, as I reflect, the contrast is unmistakable. The man who once seemed untouchable, confident in his secret indulgences, and above accountability is humbled, while I stand firm, fully aware, and impossible to deceive again. The emotional arc has come full circle, from betrayal to validation, from humiliation to triumph, from secrecy to clarity. Viewers can feel the satisfaction of justice served, the empowerment of agency reclaimed, and the catharsis of seeing truth and integrity finally prevail. The journey ends not with vengeance alone, but with understanding, strength, and the undeniable satisfaction of being seen, heard, and vindicated.